All right, here we're going to do a screen replacement demonstration or sign replacement demonstration. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and bring in the footage that we're going to use, and we'll all be using the same footage for the most part. So we'll be bringing in this beach clip that I got royalty free from Pexels. Again, there's a bunch of sites that you can always download some footage and photos and things like that from. And I'll be providing more links as we go along. So I imported that with the footage, so it brings in the whole clip. It generates a composition for me already, so that way I don't have to work on any of the additional settings or things like that. What we'll do is we'll play back the clip so you can see what we're working with here. It's a pretty simple one where the camera operator is moving along a walk path on a beach. One of the things that I will say is that this last segment here, where he starts to kind of stumble a little bit, we're not going to really use. So we'll go ahead and stop that here, probably just about 10 seconds. And I'm bringing this tail in here to stop that. And when you scrub through or play your preview back, it'll actually stop at the end of that preview window there. So we're not going to work with the tail end of this clip. If you wanted to, you can actually track and paste over the umbrella over top of the sign. That's more of an advanced aspect of this. But right now, we're just going to create a planar track. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to go up to our animation selection here. Actually, first select the clip that we're going to track. Go to animation. We're going to track in Boris FX Mocha. That'll bring up, it'll add the plugin onto the clip, and then we're going to click the Mocha icon here, and that's going to launch our Boris Mocha FX tracker here. So we'll close out that little window. It's going to start up and tell it to start, and it'll bring in the whole clip here. Now again, this tracker here is also going to bring in the whole clip. It's not going to tail out that section, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this little red piece here over to that window, and that way it'll just stop right as that umbrella gets there and bounce back for us. Now some of y'all's tracking systems might show up like this initially, and that's not a bad problem. You can just choose this and change it down to classics. Just drop the little menu here. I like this is the older interface that Mocha came with, one that I'm more familiar with myself. It also has a lot more options when you're doing a planar track, so you can get a cleaner track. So to start off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose this spline tool up here, this X-spline layer tool, and I'm going to draw a little sort of bubble around my sign. And what that's going to do, and then once you're done clicking your points, right click to exit out of the spline tool, and that'll finish the spline itself. The smaller you can make it, generally in most cases makes it run a little faster, but I'm not worried as much about speed as I am accuracy, so I'm going to go ahead and make sure this thing is encased, surrounded by that spline tool. I'm going to go ahead and select perspective, just because I do believe some of the rotation and movement of the camera might change that perspective. I'll go ahead and increase this to 90% pixels used, and get out of that. That way, that's going to increase the quality of the track to make sure that we have a solid object staying on that. And then to go forward, all we're going to do is hit this track button over here, which is track forward. And that's going to go through the program, and it's going to scrub each individual frame, and it's going to analyze that plane, make sure it's tracking that plane through all of those things: translation, scale, rotation, shear, and perspective. So it's going to grab all of that data for us automatically and interpolate that so that we can bring that back into Adobe After Effects. So it's going to track forward, and like I said, this should only take a few seconds. It can take longer depending on how difficult the clip is that might track or what you're working with. But for this one, I started off with a pretty simplistic sign replacement that we'll use here. So we'll let that finish tracking, and we'll bring that back into After Effects here in a second. All right, so now we're nearing the end of our track here, and looks like everything's looking good so far. Now, one of the things we want to do in this program is to show the planar surface. This is the actual data that will come across in our program in After Effects for the screen replacement. So what we can do is we can zoom in into our spot here, and go back with the selection tools and basically put these corner pins on the edges of this sign. And so you'll get them as close as you can, making sure you create a nice good solid plane there. This will also, this information will adjust as the track to handle the perspective and rotation and everything else there. So now we can play back that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom out here, go back, and we'll play it back through and watch that square now, that blue square that's stuck on our sign. And as you see, it'll bounce back and forth, showing us multiple times that that's working. You can also click on the grid, and that will show you the full plane of that, the perspective of that plane, so that you can look at it and make sure that it's actually, you know, where it should be, the perspective, the angle, and all that stuff. Because if it is off by a little bit, it does become, you know, really noticeable. So it's definitely a good idea to check those things. Now, if you wanted to get super detail oriented, sometimes you might have a clip that, here, I'm going to turn that off real quick, that you might want to look at a little bit deeper, the corner pins, just to make sure they're on. This one, I don't think we're really going to be hindered by that as much, but when you're working with highly detailed shots, you'll select which corner pin you want, and it's going to show you where that corner pin is sitting. And you can use these up and down tools to select where you want that to be, to make sure that it is correct and on each corner of that. See, I don't really care for that one. The auto sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. Again, if you notice that we're zoomed in here really tight, you know, you see a little bit more of those pixels and things like that. So it's not super sharp, but that's just the cost of when you have, you know, a shot like this. So I think that's pretty fair right there. We'll go ahead and back out, and we'll we'll take a look at that, make sure those look like they're on. Everything looks like it's holding true. Our sign looks like it's pretty straightforward there. So now once you're done with this track here, we're going to go ahead and save it. So either Control S or through the File menu here, Save Project. What that's going to do is it's going to send the data back to Adobe After Effects. So we're going to close this, and what you'll notice is that now nothing really shows up yet until we get there. So the tracking data, you can go ahead and click down here on this arrow and say Create Tracking Data, and choose the layer for which we were in Mocha using, which was layer 1, and hit OK. And now all of that information is already brought in here, all that data that we were tracking. And if you scrub through it, you can obviously see that data changing as I scrub through here. And we will work with that tracking data once we bring in our elements. Now, we can either create you know, a solid in Photoshop. Let's say we wanted to bring in, you know, some pieces of wood or some design work that we've done. But just for out of simplicity to show you guys how this works, I'm going to create a text solid with my name on it, and I'm going to say that this is going to be my private beach. Okay, so Brendan's private beach, and we're going to scale that down here just for now so we can see it. I'm going to bring it over, take my caps lock off because I was using that. That will prevent rendering from happening. I'm going to color it. I'll go ahead and choose a color similar to that of the sign that was there. And, you know, maybe play with it a little bit to what my personal taste is. Obviously, you can change it to anything you want. You can make it anything you want. It doesn't have to be, you know, what was there, but for the sake of the tutorial here, we're just going to create something pretty simplistic. Now, because the text itself is visible behind, you know, all the stuff is visible behind, I'm going to go ahead and create a solid, and I'm going to make that solid the similar color as the sign itself. So it's kind of a pale blue. We'll go ahead and create that, and then there's the solid there. What we're going to do is drop that behind the text, and we're going to select both of them using Shift or Control, your choice, and pre-compose. And then we're going to call that sign. That's going to move all of the attributes into the new composition, and select OK. Now we're going to go back to beach, and we're going to take the export option under our Mocha tracking data. We're going to choose corner pin with supporting motion blur, support motion blur. I don't think this clip necessarily is going to show much for motion blur, but it's helpful to have, you know, just in case there is something there. It's really not going to take up too much more resources. We're going to tell it that we want to export that data to our sign layer, and then we're going to apply export. Now, it's now put our sign, our created sign, over top of where that was. Now, one of the things you might notice that looking in here, my text is a little off and wonky looking. It's really thin and narrow. So we can come in here, we come into the composition for the sign, we can select the text, and we can stretch it out. Just stretch out that text. And this is a perspective issue. So we created a composition that was 1080p using the white of the sign, and then it scaled that down to fit the length and width of which the sign is. So to compensate for that, you have to stretch some of the material out, or you would have to bring in a composition that would work. But with the corner pin data, it's using your main composition size, so 1920 by 1080, as the standard for the corner pin. So again, having that, you're still going to have to work with some of that stretch on some of these things like that, but plan ahead. Part of the research phase that you want to make sure you know what signs are going to look like, things like that, or when you're generating content. So now we move back to our beach composition, which has our other composition in it, and we can play back that clip now, and we can see that my sign now is holding true to the sign that was there. Nothing seems to be bleeding through, nothing seems to be shifting or having any issues. And so that's a real basic sign replacement. Now, that's not where we normally would leave things when we're wanting to make them professional and kind of final versions. We would come in and do maybe some color treatment to it. We would add some, you know, some blur, some focus, and some of those things can be done through simple effects. One of the things I do with most of the stuff that I work on is I bring in some noise. Because any static object, whether it be a solid, a photograph, or what have you, doesn't have any noise when it's played back through video. So you want to go ahead and throw on just a real basic noise plug-in onto it. And it's not much, you know, 2%, 1.5%, something like that might work. What you can do to really kind of figure that out is, you know, match it to your clip, you know, looking at your clip itself, looking at the noise that's in the clip, and then, you know, just trying to meet sort of something similar so that it has a little bit of these sort of like moving pixels across the image itself is definitely helpful. You know, obviously there's going to be some imperfections and things like that that you might want to bring in to the sign itself. You know, you could come in here and, you know, instead of having a solid color as a backdrop, bring in like a wood texture or a corrugated, you know, foam board or something like that. And that would give it a little bit of extra work around that. Again, with effects and things like that, you can, you know, work on the text. You can do some lighting stuff or some matte stuff in here to color correct that. Again, there's a lot of variabilities that you can do to make that a little bit more believable as the real sign. But for now, it actually doesn't look too bad. You know, the backdrop looks a little different just because there's some variations in here on the naturalness of that. And then this looks like it's cut out again. So one of those things is it might have, maybe working with our text to add like drop shadows, or even, some depth channels to them, things like that would be helpful. So I'm going to look for like a drop shadow. Here we go. Bring that in. Again, something minimal. Let's take a look and see what that does. So that helps out just a little bit. You can increase a little bit more, change the softness, things like that. These are all very similar, like Photoshop kind of effects. Don't want to do too much because, again, we're not creating a three-dimensional sign here with a 3D object through like a 3D animation program. We're still working with 2D stuff, but again, that pops it off, that sign, a little bit so that it does look like it's raised. Changing fonts may also be something that's helpful. One of the things you'll notice is that signs and objects have different fonts for a reason. Again, these are things to consider when you're working with your projects, is to make sure that each element that you bring in might look authentic to what's really going to be there. Ways to blend those to make them feel that they're not different, or not too different than the real world. Let's take a look at something like that. So here we've got a little different. Obviously my apostrophe is getting a little weird there, but that might be something that's workable there. All right, so that's our sign replacement basic demonstration here. I know I moved through it fast. Obviously take the time to replay it, go through it a couple times. We can turn on the motion blur and see if that does anything. It doesn't seem to do a lot. If we had a lot more movement, you probably would see something in that motion blur there. But in this case, probably not. But it does a good job, and it's not really noticeable. That would be something that would work for a project. All right, we will talk more about rotoscoping and some other sign replacements and screen replacements in the next demonstration.